Hi, this is Dr. Gregg Townsley with another segment of Dr. Gregg Talks Story, talking about the invasion of Ukraine by Russia and what Putin's goals are, and eventually we're going to talk about where is this headed, what can we expect to see in the future, and so forth. As many of you know from watching the news, there's been just a horrific number of casualties within the civilian population of Ukraine, and as of last night, 18 hospitals had been targeted and hit by Russian cruise missiles and bombs. Now, Putin had stated that this invasion was specifically for two purposes. He had stated that he was coming to basically liberate the Ukrainian people from corruption. Of course, as he says that, you have to remember that the Russian mafia is perhaps one of the most feared criminal organizations in the world, and that his oligarchs are filthy rich beyond really what many people in the West have as far as any kind of bourgeois excess. So he said he was coming to liberate the people from corruption and the demilitarization, denazification of Ukraine. Of course, this is a ridiculous claim, because there are no Nazi groups within there's no Nazi battalion, for instance, within the Ukrainian armed forces. There are certainly people who cannot stand the Russians, and the Ukrainian people, by and large, do not want the Russians on their land. They have been leaning towards the West and wanting to really become more and more of a Western-style democracy, and they've been fighting to get rid of corruption within their country. So if you ask, is there corruption in Ukraine, that's kind of like asking, is the Pope a Catholic? The answer is absolutely yes. There is corruption there. But to justify invading a sovereign country, which was guaranteed its sovereignty actually by Russia in the 1994 Budapest Memorandum, after the dissolution of the Soviet Empire, there were approximately 1,900, some sources say 1,800 and some odd nuclear warheads that were still on Ukrainian soil. So Ukraine had been part of the Soviet Socialist Republics, the USSR, and when that broke up in 1991, they still had a lot of nukes. In fact, they were the third largest stockpile of nuclear weapons in the world, larger than even China is today. They agreed to give these nukes to Russia, and under the control of Moscow. At that time, Boris Yeltsin was the president of Russia, and he got together with the head of Ukraine and with Bill Clinton, who kind of brokered this deal, president of the United States at that time, and they signed this Budapest Memorandum to give up these nukes, and in return for that, they would be identified and recognized as a sovereign country, and Russia promised to not interfere in their country, and yet interfere they have repeatedly, and they are most definitely a big part of the corruption that exists within the country of Ukraine. So if you go forward, we showed this election, which was just horrible in 2004 with Yanukovych and Yushchenko. Yushchenko, who was running against Yanukovych, who was backed by Russia in a rigged election. This Yushchenko was poisoned, and then the Orange Revolution occurred, where the people rose up to want to get rid of this Russian influence that still existed within their society, and they also wanted to get rid of corruption. They've been fighting to get rid of corruption ever since they became a free nation again. And Yushchenko won, and things went forward. We looked at the past history of Ukraine in relationship to Russia and the fact that in 1932-33 they had suffered badly in what was called the Holodomor, which, or in Russian Golodomor, and this is was Joseph Stalin purposefully starving to death almost 4 million people, 3.96 million people, to impose collectivism and destroy nationalism. He did everything possible to destroy the heart of the Ukrainian people. He took their land away. He sent more than 50,000 families, which basically adds up to almost 300,000 people, were shipped off to Siberia. And this kind of activity has, of course, turned the hearts of the Ukrainians firmly against Russia. We also looked at the fact that the Ukrainians hate the Nazis. They do not embrace far right-wing Nazism in any way, shape, or form. They had the Babi Yar massacre just to the west of Kiev, in which 35,000 Ukrainian Jews were stripped and machine gunned into a large ravine. And then following that, that was in 1941, September 29th, 1941. After that, in 1942 and 43, thousands more were machine gunned into that same ravine. They estimate that 100,000 Ukrainians were slaughtered by the Nazis. So do not think that, that in any way they love the Nazis. So Putin's plans for conquest are pushing forward. He is, in fact, targeting hospitals, and he has also, of course, as most of you have seen, he has a particular interest in the infrastructure, the power infrastructure. He's gone after the nuclear generators, and even one, causing fire and so forth. There's some very dangerous activity that he has a lot of people in Europe very concerned about. In fact, I have a friend living in France who is looking to buy, a gas mask and iodine tablets and everything else. You have people who are very frightened of what's happening as a result of this Russian invasion. The latest thing is, of course, they promised to have some corridors for civilians to escape from these battle zones, these cities that are being heavily bombarded with artillery, and many civilian structures, residences, apartment buildings, city centers, community centers are being destroyed. Beautiful buildings, by the way. I was there in October and September of this last year. I was in Kiev and made a trip out to the beautiful little city of Sumy, and that is, as you've probably been aware through the press, has had incredible shelling, a lot of destruction. These are very sweet, family-oriented people who really have no interest in politics. They just want to live their lives, be left alone, perhaps gain a higher standard of living. And unfortunately, they are just being, tragically destroyed as Putin really tries to intimidate the Ukrainian people and break their spirit so that they will not continue to fight back so valiantly. And they have fought valiantly. In this attempt to come into Ukraine, Putin has made some major miscalculations. Some of them are logistical and have to do with strategic moves as far as his troops and being able to supply his troops. But in addition to that, he has tragically miscalculated the response of the Ukrainian people to his invasion. The Ukrainian people not only have drawn together as one as a result of this. The only place probably where that doesn't hold true is on the Donbass area in the far east of Ukraine, where there are a lot of Russian sympathizers. And you'll remember in the last segment, I talked about the fact that the reason that Ukraine went into take over these areas of the Donbass where Russia had made incursions and were holding rigged elections was because of the Malaysian passenger jet that was brought down in 2014 by these Russian separatists firing a surface-to-air missile and hitting a commercial jetliner, killing, I believe it was 298 passengers on that jet. That was an international incident that that Ukraine could not ignore, and they went in to try to clean out these Russian separatists. 14,000 Ukrainian troops died in the fighting there in the Donbass area, and many more have died since the year 2014. Now, as Putin miscalculated how Ukraine would respond, he also has badly miscalculated how other countries who were former Soviet states have responded. They are looking at this with absolute fear and feeling that they might be next. This would be the areas they're right next to Ukraine and Belarus. That would include Poland, Hungary, Romania, etc. These countries are now under the protection of NATO, and one of Putin's great fears, because he does run not only as a strategist, calculating what might happen, but he does seem to have a certain element of paranoia going to the point where in his country right now, if you even mention the word war in conjunction with his invasion of Ukraine, or you say the word invasion, those people are being arrested and put in prison. So he completely and totally controls the information that comes to his populace. And in spite of that, there have been a number of protests there in Russia as people have found out from their relatives and so forth and so on about what has been transpiring in Ukraine. The soldiers themselves, as they've come into Ukraine, most of them thought they were going on training exercises or that they were liberating people from criminal corruption within the country. So they have not been received well. There have been people who are standing out there, standing in front of tanks, people who are coming out completely unarmed and chanting against the Russian troops. And this is really affecting the morale of the Russian troops, many of whom actually have relatives who live in Ukraine. So Putin has made a major miscalculation in how the West would respond, with now Europe drawing closer to America and being really thought of as being a pariah now, being persona non grata to the rest of the world. Putin is putting on a very bad face to the point where even China, who refused to censure them completely in the Security Council in the United Nations, is making statements, pulling back away from any kind of support, of actual support of Russia. It is thought that perhaps Putin and Xi has some sort of agreement that China would say nothing about their invasion of Ukraine if Russia said nothing about China wanting to invade Taiwan. And so that, of course, is a huge potential issue here in the future, because mainland China has had designs on the island of Formosa, which is the nation of Taiwan, for many, many years, ever since Chiang Kai-shek retreated to the island of Formosa and formed the government of Taiwan. So where are things at as of today? Well, more and more we have the whole world turning against Russia. Russia has been saying that there are bioweapons research labs or biolaboratories within Ukraine that the United States has supported. And of course, the pushback from our administration and from our news has been that this is just more of the Russian disinformation, and yet today it was brought out that in a House Senate committee where some hard questions were put forth, that there are actually some facilities there, and that perhaps some of the materials had not been secured prior to this invasion, even though they had amassed approximately 190,000 troops on the border with Ukraine prior to this invasion. So unfortunately, we see that once again, there's a propaganda war, and there are things that are statements being made mostly on the side by the Russians to try to validate themselves or justify themselves in taking this action. We're seeing that they're trying to cut off the southern part of the country. They really want Odessa badly, but they are waiting until they consolidate their gains in Mariupol, which has been tragically shelled just as bad as Kharkiv in the north and the east part of Ukraine. And they have all kinds of personal reasons for doing this, but basically they're trying to build a land connection between Donbass in the far east. Mariupol is the next big city along the Sea of Azov, and then coming all the way across to the Black Sea. They're coming up out of Crimea. They're spreading in both directions to take cities on either side, such as Kherson, which is close to the mouth of the Dnieper River, where it comes into the Black Sea. And then the next large town to the east of there would be Odessa. Odessa has always been actually a place for vacations for Russian oligarchs, and it has a large Russian-speaking populace, but they are standing against Putin and his plans. They want to be free, they want to be democratic, and they want to have freedom of speech, which does not exist within Russia. They want to have the freedom to choose, even though some of the choices they have are not great, and they've had problems with corrupt politicians. Nonetheless, the people want to be free. They love their country. They're standing behind their leader, behind Zelensky, whatever you think of him. But part of the ridiculous kind of rhetoric coming out of Putin's mouth is that Zelensky is somehow supporting Nazi elements within the country. Well, Zelensky is Jewish, and his three uncles, his father had three brothers, and three of his uncles were killed as a result of Russia. So I'm sorry, as far as the Nazis killed as a result of that. So you have to understand, this country has been invaded many times. It was ruled by the Soviets for a short period of time. It was ruled by the Nazis. They hate them both, and they don't want them in their country. So please be praying for Ukraine. Maybe pray some strategic prayers. That's what I would say would be smart. Very specific things like confusion would come upon the Russian troops. Perhaps pray that the bombs do not find civilian targets. Pray that they can't hit any more hospitals. Pray that the people of Ukraine are able to get out, the people who want to leave. We have a huge refugee crisis of Ukrainians coming into the rest of Europe, and for the large part, Europe is opening its arms. Many different nations in Europe are preparing for this large influx of Ukrainian refugees. So please be praying for this horrible situation, and pray that in some way Russia will be held accountable. We're seeing increasingly how economic things have been put in place that really quite easily could have been put in place a long time ago. And as last spring, a year ago, Russia had mounted a huge number of troops. 80,000 was the estimate on the border with Ukraine, and then they pulled back and said that it was just a staging and and training exercise. They have intimidated, they have tried to affect through fear the leadership of Ukraine to pull away from the West, to not become a member of NATO, etc. This has been a concern of theirs all along. But these various different reasons that Putin has in his own mind are no justification for invading another nation and killing its civilians. I think that's about it for today. So thank you for joining me for another segment on the Russian-Ukraine war and the invasion of Ukraine by Putin's forces. I hope that you will be keeping the people of Ukraine in your prayers, and pray for the safety of the refugees. Pray that they're able to find a place to live. These people are leaving literally not even with a suitcase, many times just with a bag that they're carrying with some clothes in it. There are little children who are a huge part, almost all women and children. The men are required to stay, and most of the men want to stay and fight, or they want to stay in supportive type positions. And I'm talking to my friends there on a daily basis. Don't believe the Russian misinformation regarding anything having to do with Nazis. Don't believe the Russian misinformation, that the people really love the Russians coming in order to get rid of corruption in their own government. They know that what they suffered under Russia was far worse than what they suffer as a result of any corruption in their government. And of course, let's not be self-righteous about corruption in government. We have plenty of it ourselves. And once again, the analogy that I've made is that Putin saying that he has a right to invade Ukraine because of corruption and because they have a common ancestry is like the United States saying that we could invade Canada because of the corruption and tyranny there in Justin Trudeau's administration, and the fact that we have a common ancestry in England. It's completely and totally ridiculous. Thanks again for listening. Have a great day. This is Dr. Gregg with Dr. Gregg Talks.